I mean, back when I was 5, I wanted to teach. I was called. I loved every minute I was teaching. I sang all the time. So I said, I will be the music teacher in some school. Bernice, you're not coming in here with us. I would never let you stay. You belong into the world. I look back today and say, oh, how could you ever say that? I want to change education in the world. And he howled. Oh my God, you might have a little trouble doing that, but let's get you started on your PhD. Yeah. I was in a worker's high all my life. I'm Bernice McCarthy. I always had to teach somebody something. When I was 5 years old, there were little kids in the neighborhood of 3 who were 3 years old. And I felt it was shame that they couldn't read yet. And people thought they had to go to school to learn to read. And I don't remember learning to read. You should ask yourself, do you remember learning to read? I just could read all of a sudden, right? It wasn't a chore. So I said, well, I can teach these kids. Our house had a basement, it had a dirt floor. They had this little platform. I don't know what it was for, but I decided I could get on there like a stage. And I could have those little kids right in front of me, and I could teach them how to read. And we could play with the letters and the sounds and make them up and do all this stuff with them. And I did. And they all learned how to read. And I remember when they went to school, my mother laughed one time, told me she had a complaint from a neighbor that the teacher was angry that the child could read when he went to kindergarten. And she said, look what you did, Bernice. Good, I wanted them to learn. So it was always teaching, always. And then I remember and our school was to me, was so easy. I was always a straight A student. And I got expelled from school because it was Lent in the Catholic Church, and we had to go every single noontime instead of lunch to the Stations of the Cross, and that was every day in Lent. And I remember sitting there that day in church and looking around at the boys, and they didn't have to wear a hat. I said, why do we have to wear a hat? So I went back into my class and said to the nun, why do I have to wear a hat when the boys don't? Oh, Bernice, that's just the law of the church. I said, what? What kind of a law is that? So she hands it to me and I take it home. And I go down, everything fine till I got to number 9. And number 9 said, it's probably still there, that females cannot have their hair showing in church. It has to be covered. And I went, okay, and why? What's after the comma? Because their hair is a source of lust to men, period. That was the reason. And I said, no way am I ever wearing a hat again. No way. That if you wore a Kleenex on your head with a bobby pin that held it in there, that would suffice for rule number 9 in the rubrics book. So every time I went to church after that, we had bobby pins in our pockets all the time, and there they were, and my Kleenex, I had to go on my head. So that was one of the things that happened. And I was in high school. I went to see Mother Teresa Mary. She would have these great conversations. Then they got very deep after a while. She was a really deep and lovely, wonderful woman. And so I went to her to tell her that I had decided. I sang all the time. So I said, I will be the music teacher in some school in Montreal, Canada, as a nun with you guys. And she put her head back and hysterically laughed. She pushed the chair back, like that, hysterically laughed. And then she was almost crying, she was laughing so hard. And she put my hand out. She wasn't making fun of me. She held my hand like that, and she said, Bernice, you're not coming in here with us. You're going into the world. I would never let you stay. You belong into the world. And then it was later that one of those same nuns told me that she would sacrifice in her entire life of teaching. I mean, back when I was 5, I wanted to teach. I was called. I loved every minute I was teaching. I knew I could teach. And I never understood why other teachers didn't have that gift. One time, when I was getting my master's, the master's degree was awarded to me if I would do the work I was doing in that high school And I took the 100 kids that hated school, and I was their principal. And of course, guess what they were? I was teaching all fours, right? And those 100 kids were all fours, and it was so much fun, so much fun, right? I remember when I quit teaching that way, I remember saying to Bill, it was Christmas and we were buying presents for the kids for Christmas, and we were having lunch together. He knew I was really bummed out because I decided to leave that high school. And I said, Bill, what am I going to do now? I remember I was crying. And he said, don't be silly. Go get a PhD. I said, how am I going to do that? You can do it. We'll pay for it. Go to Northwestern and walk in the door to the Department of Education, walk and say, who do I have to talk to? I'd like to get a PhD. And I said, really? He said, you can do that. But see, I couldn't. That was, this was something that was not me. Northwestern, are you kidding me? Oh my God. But I did it anyway. And I walked in, his name was Bill Hazard. He moved to a chair so he could sit like that and really talk to me, you know. And he said, okay, but why do you want another master's? And I said, because I'm not smart enough to get a PhD. And he just threw his head back and said, oh, please. You're getting a doctorate, you're not getting another master's. And so he said, what do you want to do with your life now if you get that master's in cognition is what I wanted. I didn't want teaching, I wanted how mind worked. And I said, oh, and I don't know how I ever came up with it. I look back today and thought, how could you ever say that? I said, I want to change education in the world. And he howled. I can still see him back in his chair with his leg up like that saying, oh my God, you're going to change. You might have a little trouble doing that, but let's get you started on your PhD. Yeah, Bill Hazard. He's one of the great people. I would say always, you have to go find out what all the beautiful things are. That there are people who have understood things and written about them, and books everywhere. That you can find the whole world today at your fingertips, never mind with the internet and everything else we have. That there's no way in the world that you can't become, to be really alive. The whole thing is to be really alive, meaning there's always something beautiful and exciting that's going to happen. If I can learn how to do this, if I can read this, if I can understand this. And so I tell teachers, you know, Quadrant 4 is not just measuring, did they do it? See, everyone thinks evaluation is, did Summer pass the test I gave her? Yes, she got everything right on the test. That's my evaluation. Good for you. I say, no, that isn't. The evaluation would be, what can you do with what I taught you that's new, that I don't know about? That you could create something from what I taught you so that I'm handing this over to you and then you're going to hand this back to the world. You know, there was a young boy in that high school whose name was Chris, and I loved him. Some people that just attract love. He was one of those people. And it was graduation day. We were in the gym, and he was putting on his cap and gown. And I was putting on mine because I had to go in the procession with all the kids graduating. And he came up to me and he said, and Chris said to me that day, that's June day, putting on his cap and gown, I took every class you ever taught. I said, I know, I love you, Chris, I'm so glad. You never gave me an A. And I thought, oh, I'm so sorry. What did I give you? B minus. I would have, didn't I tell you guys that you could have an A if you just added something of yourself to it? That would make it an A. I guess you never did. Oh, I guess I didn't read your papers. Oh, I felt so bad. And all my life, that child has been in my head, that I disappointed him. I took every class you ever taught, and I never had an A once. And so to me, the A was, here's what I did with what you taught me. Here's how I'm looking at it now. Here's what I'm doing. And once the kids learned that what I wanted, they came right with me. And then they left feeling, they were feeling that they were good. And still, you'd have them come and hug me now, and they're 40 years old. and they'll come up someplace and say, God, I remember you teaching me. And it was that calling forth that was the magic of Fullmet. Workers High.
Workers High.
I never heard it before. Yeah. It would be like what went through my life. I was in a Workers High all my life. I mean, when I went out teaching, back when the kids were 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, or even sooner than that, the baby was still not 1. I was sitting in my kitchen and I started to cry because I hated what my life was like. I was constantly taking care of them, changing diapers, and it just wasn't, there's no way for me to go off quietly and read. It was just impossible. So if you do what you have to do. So I'm sitting there crying. I prayed and said, tell me what you want me to do. And I said, I want you to teach. Okay. So I hired a woman. I asked around from the friends I had about anyone who would like to work with 5 small boys and live at the house, live there, and go home on Friday afternoon and come back Sunday afternoon. And who would like to do that? And finally I met this woman. She came, and she was an African-American woman, and she said, I said, why do you want this job? She said, I want to have time to learn to read. And I thought, because you wanted to go teach, you might be someone who would hire me and you could teach me to read, because I want to read the Bible. And so I said, you're hired. Every penny I made teaching, I handed to her. I never made a dime teaching. So I was so happy to take the money and hand it to her. So she was doing what I couldn't stand doing anymore, and I was doing what I wanted to do. And we taught her to read.
Yeah.